got to pick music. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the special Chino City Council meeting. Roll call. Clerk, please note that Councilman Howie is absent. First item on the agenda is public communications. Anybody wishing to address the council on any item that does not appear on the agenda may do so now. And reminded, you have 5 minutes for your presentation. Seeing none, I'll close public communications. First item on the agenda is public hearing, proposed voting by district boundary maps. Staff report will be given this evening by our city attorney, Mr. Gutierrez. Jimmy?
Yes, Mayor, members of the council, members of the public, I'm going to truncate my report. It's in writing, but I'm truncating it in order so we can catch up with the information that Mr. Johnson is going to provide. But just by way of background, I'd like to indicate that what brings us here today is a threat of litigation by the Schenkman firm that's been suing a lot of cities. The allegation that he's made is that the city of Chino is experiencing racially polarized voting, which is prohibited by the California Voting Rights Act. When he sent the letter, I talked to him and I asked him for the evidence. He did not want to give it to me, and I have never received it. So not sure if it exists or not, but nevertheless, he's also alleging that there's been a number of years that there have been no Latino council members, and that's part of the challenge. That's a similar challenge to what they've made in other cities and maintain other actions. They have a lawsuit. They've had a lawsuit that they just won against the city of Highland. They have a lawsuit now that they've commenced against the city of Rancho Cucamonga, and they've also entered in a settlement agreement of sorts with the city of Upland, and they're proceeding with the city of Upland. Once this process started, the city council adopted 2 resolutions. One resolution was to direct us to proceed in this direction, and also set up criteria for the drawing of district maps. The criteria that was set up was general criteria that's required and permitted by both the Federal Voting Rights Act and the California Voting Rights Act. And those criteria is set forth in the district maps that you will see today. Some of you may know that the city of Chino created a special web page for this issue, and everything that we have on the subject is on that web page. We posted the Schenkman letter, we posted all our memorandums, we posted all the report. There's a letter by the mayor of Chino, there's a question and answer information, and there's all the agendas, including the videotapes of the last council meetings dealing with the subject. So we've tried to be as transparent as we can so that the public can see and understand what we're going on. We recognize that this has come suddenly, and one of the reasons it came suddenly is because the legislature adopted a new statute that became effective in January 1, which was the basis of the letter that Schenkman sent to us and other cities. And that legislation states that a city with a population of under 100,000 may, by council action, adopt elections by district. That wasn't the law before. That's not the law for cities over 100,000. Those cities, and in the past, had to put these measures on the ballot and had to be voted upon the people. Unfortunately, in some cases, when the maps were placed on the ballot, the public didn't vote for it, and that fact that they didn't vote for it became the basis for a lawsuit that was subsequently won against the city. So the law that permitted or that required it to go to a vote of the people, in effect, ended up creating a bigger problem for the cities that were trying to comply by putting the measure on the ballot. Fortunately, for cities under 100,000, we don't have that requirement. We may put it on the ballot, but that was the hook in the letter that Mr. Schenkman sent. If you read it, you will see that he never mentions the new law, but it was clear, after I communicated with our special counsel on the subject, she informed me that, well, he's setting you up because he's telling you to do it by November of 2016. You have the ability to do it under the new statute, but he's going to wait until you no longer have the ability to do it, and then he's going to sue you, because that's what he does. And so fortunately, we got good counsel, and we're going in this direction. So I'm going to end there. I think those of you who are here today understand pretty much what's going on, and certainly that information is available on our webpage. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Johnson, because now he's at the point where he's actually done the demographic studies, and he's created maps, and he's created maps with districts that attempt to meet all the legal requirements and those criteria that's set forth in our resolution. So, Mr. Johnson, your turn.
Thank you very much, and my apologies to you, and in particular to the members of the audience for the delay. It actually took me about 2 hours to get here from Glendale. So I will try to go through this quickly, but make sure we touch on this and so we can get to the public comment. As was mentioned, Jimmy covered the process. The real step-by-steps that we're at now is today is really look at the alternatives and kind of, I think it was a brainstorming session. We can talk about alternatives, we can look at possibilities of moving things as would be appropriate to match the neighborhoods of the city. At the next meeting, May 4th, is really when we'll ask the council to give direction on which map you prefer. And then that map will come back as part of the ordinance that you'll see on May 17th for the first reading and final adoption on June 7th. So very fast process, as was just mentioned. The timing, unfortunately, is driven by the threat of lawsuit. It's out of our control. But that is our step-by-step. Today is kind of brainstorm, and really the next meeting on May 4th is when we'll essentially be picking a map. We talked a lot about the criteria at your last hearing on this. Just to cover them briefly, we have 3 federal requirements. Is it not displaying right? Let me see. Let me see if I can get the display to go up here. Yeah, it should be going. Yeah. Let's see if that works better. We're getting somewhat the signs. Close. I don't know if I do this. Oh, there we go, sort of. It's a little distorted, sorry. Okay, so the criteria we're looking at on the federal side, we have 3 requirements. These are must-dos. We have to have an equal number of people in each district, and it is total population as measured by the 2010 census. Then we have to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act, which means we can't pack or crack what the law calls a protected class, here we're mainly talking about Latinos, in a way that dilutes their voting power. And then we can't racially gerrymander, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And all the draft plans I'm going to show you comply with all 3 of those. They do. Where the decisions really come down is on what are called traditional principles. So keeping communities of interest together as much as we can, trying to keep the districts compact, contiguous, and following major roads so that they're easy for the voters to understand and tell their friends where the borders are. Trying to respect the voters' past choices by leaving decisions on who gets elected to another term or reelected up to the voters rather than to my line drawing. And then as we talked about last time, you can consider planned future growth, but because these lines will be updated after the 2020 census, there really isn't that much time between now and then to look at that in much detail. I talked about the racial gerrymandering. This map shows you the Latino percentage of the eligible voters as measured by citizens of voting age in each census block. So you can see the reds are 75% or higher, the yellows are 65 to 75%, greens are 50 to 65%, you get down to the blues and purples that are 35% or lower. With my computer, I could obviously take the little clicker and go right around the reds and yellows and just pick those blocks and really get the most Latino district possible. But that's using race as the predominant factor, and that's the Supreme Court's test. It can't be that you can have race as a factor. In fact, you have to ensure compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. But it can't be the predominant factor. We're still supposed to focus on neighborhoods. So neighborhoods come in many ways, as you know, and there are many ways to define them. They can be the area around a school. They can be the area around a park. In your case, they can be the area between major cross streets. Whatever the people who live in a neighborhood say is a neighborhood really is the neighborhoods we want to keep together. So now into the meat of what's really the new stuff, the draft maps. So as I mentioned, all the maps I'm going to show you comply with the federal requirements of equal population, Voting Rights Act, and race is not the predominant factor. We also comply with all the traditional redistricting principles, but we balance them in different ways. So they all are focused on communities of interest, reasonably compact, contiguous, and following major roads, and respecting the voters' past choices. Where they differ is in two things. Two of the maps have 4 seats, the other 2 have 6 seats, so you'd end up with a 5-member or a 7-member council, given the at-large mayor. And then, even more noticeable, you can see how they group the communities of interest. So we try to keep the neighborhoods together as much as we can, but which neighborhoods go with which other neighborhoods varies a lot. And then at the bottom here, you can see a summary of the Latino citizen voting age population in terms of the Federal Voting Rights Act compliance. We're looking at a couple different approaches. In the 4 district plans, they're fairly similar. You get 2 that are 55 to 58% Latino, or 54 and 67% Latino. In the 6-seat plans, there are really 2 different choices. The first one that you'll see, all of the districts, well, I should say 5 of the 6 districts are majority Latino. Just a little bit, 51, 52, 50%, 54%, and then 1, 62%. And then the other approach has a 63, a 60, and a 51. So you only have 3 that are majority Latino, but they're definitely a majority Latino. Remember that this data comes from a survey. The Census Bureau contacts 1 out of every 14 houses and then tries to use that data to approximate more specific numbers. So see if it's 51 or 52%, well, it might be 45, it might be 55. There's a margin of error in all of this. So different approaches to data, but the special counsel has reviewed all these, Mr. Gutierrez has reviewed all these, and we're confident that all 4 plans comply with all the legal requirements. So we're really looking at which plans make the most sense for your neighborhoods and your communities. So our first map, called 4-1, 4 indicates 4 seats, and it's the first of the 2 scenarios we have. The one that really jumps out at this is you have 2 districts that come down south of Edison Avenue. So obviously down in District 3, it's really getting the airport down the far end, but it's also getting College Park. And so it's getting a lot of the new homes down there, so they're not all packed into one district. And then obviously District 4 comes down and gets a lot of the new growth as well. Then up north you have, we call that kind of a stair step. It's really balancing populations. You get different densities from kind of city neighborhood to city neighborhood, and it's balancing densities and making sure we don't pack the Latinos in 1 and 2. The other big plus of this is that all 4 districts have a big share of Central Avenue. We talked a little bit last time about Pasadena and how Pasadena went to districts just as they tried to redevelop their downtown. And they wanted each council member to have a piece of their downtown. And so every district in Pasadena goes down and touches Colorado. It worked very well. It kept all the council members invested in redeveloping Colorado, and it's obviously worked very well. And what that avoids is a council member who says, I don't have any territory down there. I'm not going to vote for that unless you give me something up here. In that case, for Colorado, and in this case for Central, you'd obviously have 4 council members very highly invested in what happens on Central under this map. Draft 4-2 takes a different approach. It has a very compact center of the city, District 3, going from Edison up to Riverside and then jogging up to get the school up by Jefferson. And then you really get a southern district, a northwest district, and a northeast district. Both of these are certainly valid approaches that work. The question is, which one do you feel works better for your city, and which one do the residents feel works better? Obviously, when we go to 6 districts, you get a very different take because you get more districts that are much smaller. Obviously, you'd be expanding the number of people on the council. In draft 1 that you see here, they're really horizontal districts. They largely defined by your east-west roads, Chino, Riverside, Schaefer, and Walnut. And the one big difference that really jumps out at me between these 2 maps is District 4. So you can see in this case, you get District 4 is really between Riverside and Schaefer on the west side of town. And then everything below Schaefer goes into District 6. In the second version, you can see over in the west side, the numbers have shifted around a little bit as I redrew, but that western district now is very different. Chino Hills Parkway all the way up to the northwest corner of the city. And that ends up getting kind of a northwest, but very different northwest seat, District 1, a very northern, north of Walnut, District 2, and then 3 and 4 kind of take the middle of town. And 6 comes up in this case and gets much more the eastern side of town, coming all the way up to Chino Avenue. You may have noticed in the first one, there's that pocket of the city. I worked and worked and worked to try to combine those, and it just doesn't work. So in the 6 district plans, District 6 needed to come up and pick up the far east edge of town. In this case, it picks up a more compact neighborhood on the east side and then doesn't come up nearly as high in the rest of town. So that's a quick summary of these plans. I'm happy to come back and I can open them in the mapping software and zoom in and out. We have put them up in an interactive map as well so that the public can zoom in and out and see the details, and you can even switch the view and look at satellites and see your own house in our map. So happy to answer any questions you have or come back after the public.
Well,
Yes,
the
definitely. Yes, definitely.
You can have a seat, Mr. Johnson. We can, if there's any questions, we can access. You can sit up here at the dais if you would. You have a microphone right there. And what we're going to do now is I'll open the public hearing. I have 4 written requests to speak. We'll open that now, and then we'll close the public hearing, and council members will make comments. First one is Tony Hawley. State your name for the record, Ms. Hawley, and you have 5 minutes for your presentation.
My name is Tony Hawley. I spoke a couple weeks ago, and I expressed my opinion then that I was not in favor of going to the districts. And I think even when you look at the breakout here, there's no evidence to show that the Latino vote is being polarized. And I just feel instead of being one united city, we are going to be these 4 or 6 districts that are really separated. And that really bothers me because I love this city and I've lived here for a long time, and I take pride in that we are one big community, not these little pockets of the community. And the other thing that concerns me is how quick it's moving. I don't feel that it gives potential candidates enough time to really plan and prepare for a campaign run for council. And the funny thing is that the whole purpose of this is to supposedly help the Latino vote. I know of 2 Latinos were planning on running for council. Neither one of them will be able to run based on the way these districts are, because they live in districts where the current council member is not going to be up for re-election. So there's 2 Latinos right there that are going to be prevented from being able to run, and that's what this whole plan is supposed to help. I know you mentioned that Upland, and I did some research on that. Upland entered into an agreement, and it may not be the perfect thing, but it's allowing them time to I think have more community involvement. For a city this size, there's not very many people here. And 5 o'clock on a work night, I had to take off work early to come here. There's probably other people that maybe had to do that, or they can't make it. So there's not enough time for real good community input. And I think that that's something that we should have. And I think if we could, do something where we could put this off and put it to a vote and see how the people feel, or at least get it to where it comes into 2018 and give people more of a chance to participate in this whole selection, then I think that would be the ideal thing. And it just bothers me that we're being bullied by these attorneys. And
I don't think you said anything that we don't agree with, but
Right,
with
well,
your
thank
opinion.
you.
But gotta love the lawyers. Jeff Hawley, you can follow up. Is that your wife, Jeff?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a lot of what she says.
Jeff, identify yourself
Oh,
for
I'm
the
Jeff
record,
Hawley.
please. Thank you.
Okay. I live in District 2, no matter which way any of these work out.
Okay.
But yeah, the people that she mentioned, I know personally, and they were planning to run prior to any of this becoming news. I mean, so, it's not like they're trying to get it together now. It seems really lame that they're not going to get a chance now because they're both in areas, no matter which way these turn out, neither one of them will be able to run. And, isn't that what we want? I mean,
I'm not arguing with you.
it just, so if there's any chance that we can do what Upland did, to buy
Well,
some time and to, you
I
know,
won't
because,
describe exactly what Upland did, but they're in for a big awakening. If they think they got past this lawsuit, they better think again.
well, I'm
They,
thinking.
they got
that-
set up by that law firm, trust and believe me.
Okay, because it seemed to me like they were, had time, and if, you know, I don't really see that the city won't vote for it if that's the only way we can do that, you know?
Well, all the cities that put it on the ballot, including Highland, which just recently lost, put it on the ballot, and the voters voted it down, that they didn't want districting. And they were taken to court by this law firm, and the judge threw it out.
Well, at the same time, though, if these two people are able to run, you know, it's like, you know, I know them both personally, so I was planning to help them campaign. And, you know, I've got quite a few people that would help me, help them, so, I don't know, I just wish there was something to do, because wouldn't that pretty much eliminate this whole thing if one or both of them got elected?
Well, Jimmy, you can answer that question now, but it's not supposed to be about race, but it is.
Well, yeah, I know,
Because when we formed these
I
districts,
went through
it
that
was
last
done by
time I
population.
was up here.
It's between the federal law and the right to vote here in the state of California. They're,
Right, it's all about race, but we're not supposed to consider race.
It's not- right.
And that's
but you better not
confusing.
break them up, you see, so it
Right.
is, and it isn't. It's crazy. Jimmy,
But-
would you like to respond to that?
Well, it's, according to law, it's not really about race. It's not a race-based process. What it's about is that the configuration of the current at-large system could violate what the law is by diluting the vote of certain targeted community. In this case, it's a Latino community. And at this point in time, there isn't any evidence, but it's like playing poker. The other guy has a card, and he's anteed up for $3 million. So the question is, do we want to spend $3 million to find out what he's got in that whole card? And that's what the cost is. You know, Highland went through that, and they lost. Marguerite Leone, who's our attorney, fought this law firm and beat him in Whittier, and the city still had to pay $900,000 in attorney's fees, plus whatever they pay the firm. You know, Upland's going that way, Rancho's going that way. Because once those elections are held, and if they don't have the approval by the public, then the fact that they lost is going to be a basis for the lawsuit. And that attorney's going to get their attorney's fees, and we're talking about millions of dollars. But what we're doing here today is really the focus. The focus here today is dealing with how we're going to create the districts. And the districts do take into consideration, to some extent, what the Latino population is in the districts, but none of them can have an overabundance of Latino members in the population, because then that becomes race-based. So it's like everything else in life, it's a balancing. You know, it's not all or nothing, it's always a balancing, it's all gray. But so we're in the process of doing that, and we're trying to follow what the law is, and we're trying to be as transparent as we can. And we've hired the best people in the field to guide us through the process so that we achieve a result that the community can be accepting of, but also one that prevents us from falling into the trap that other cities have.
Palmdale spent $5 million and lost $5 million.
Let me add too on the timing and how fast. The weird thing is Upland's putting this on the ballot. They have to draw the lines essentially just as fast as Chino does, because they have to draw the lines. So the districts actually be drawn not knowing how this November's elections would go. And so if the two Latino council members you mentioned, one, they would be only allowed to serve one term because they would be in seats that would be up in 2018. And then when their current term ends in 2020, they would leave the council. So it doesn't really help them. And if it gets, as was mentioned, and I should note, Hesperia and Wildemar both got threatened lawsuits, both had Latinos on the council. Bridget Moore, you may not know this, Bridget Moore from Wildemar is the daughter of an immigrant from Mexico, and Eric Schmidt up in Hesperia, both his parents are immigrants from Latin America. So it's all, I think Jimmy had a great poker analogy there, which is the plaintiffs hold all the cards, unfortunately.
Well, I'm still confused.
Don't feel like the Lone Ranger. It doesn't make any
According
sense.
to the turnout, there don't seem to be any polarization.
I know, but
I just don't get this.
Just remember, the law wasn't written for civil rights and voting rights goals. It was written by the trial lawyers who wanted to bring lawsuits. So,
oops.
yeah.
Oh, well. Well, and last time I was up here, I talked about cities getting together to try to fight this, because it is a BS law. I mean.
Well, yeah. Do we want to spend millions of dollars fighting it, or do we want to spend millions of dollars giving it to the lawyers?
Well, you know, I don't see where dividing the city up is going to benefit anybody.
Well, we all agree.
Well, I'd rather spend some money doing it that way than destroying the city.
Well, we have all of us up here feel that we have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers here.
Oh, I understand that.
And that's the reason we're going along with this, is we don't want to pay those lawyers that kind of money.
Oh, well, put me down for confused.
You got, boy, you join up, yeah.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Thank you.
Gary George, come on down. State your name for the record, Gary.
Excuse me, Mayor.
5 minutes.
I'm going to be leaving.
Oh,
as
that's
I
true.
indicated, and Mr. Rufiro was going to
That's
sit in
fine.
for me. Thank you.
Yep, you betcha.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks, Gary.
Scared him off, George.
Gary George, 6571 Manzanita Street in Chino. Mayor and Council, I'm going to address concerns regarding the community area where I have resided for the past 19 years, which is in East Chino, located near Rhodes Elementary and Cypress Trails Park. I have reviewed all 4 proposed districting plans. I went through the same districting process while I was a trustee at Chaffey College, and we didn't have a choice either. And tonight I'm here to address the preservation of communities of interest. The cities of Madera, Oakland, Chula Vista, Moreno Valley all used the criteria of preservation of respecting communities of interest. The cities of Madera and Moreno Valley's districting information was also prepared by National Demographics Corporation, which, as you know, is the company being used by the city of Chino. I wish to speak about community preservation with regard to 4 plans being reviewed this evening. This community is comprised of the East Chino area, bordered by Riverside Drive on the north, Edison on the south, Euclid on the east, and Cypress on the west. In Plan 4-1, if Area 2, our neighborhood, is brought down to Edison Avenue, and it now includes the entire community. Otherwise, it cuts it off if you cut it off at Schaefer. In 4-2, again, Area 2, our neighborhood is brought down to Edison Avenue. Again, the community is preserved. It doesn't cut it off at Schaefer. On Plan 6, and by the way, I've got these marked, and I'll give it to the city clerk when I'm finished here. In Plan 6-1, Area 3, again, our neighborhood could be moved east to Euclid, south to Edison, with Cypress on the western border. Again, that preserves that neighborhood community around the park and around roads. The above suggestions would require adjustments to other adjoining boundaries to provide the approximate equalization of population, which I understand. Item number 4 in tonight's background section states the following: the boundaries of the electoral districts shall observe communities of interest as identified in public comment. And that's what I'm trying to generate here. In conclusion, please consider the suggestions I have listed that are in the interest of preserving our community. The above suggestions have been outlined on the districting plans that I'm submitting this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. My next speaker is Jesus Martinez. Sir, state your name for the record. You're reminded you have 5 minutes for your presentation.
Okay. My name is Jesus Serrato Martinez Jr. My family came to Chino in the early 1900s. Both of my grandparents lived on First Street, which is now Monte Vista, and also J Street. During that time, they were migrants, and they worked from Central California all the way down throughout all of California. They lived in tents, and they all established homes here. My mother used to talk about the times when they used to leave in May and return in October, so they would miss school during that whole period. Both of my parents were born here in Chino in the 1920s, 1921 and 1922. That's when they had midwives and there wasn't a hospital here.
Yeah.
In this area between Monte Vista, which is used to be First Street, and Benson Avenue, and bordered by Riverside Drive and Chino Avenue, I had aunts and uncles that lived on First Street, 4th Street, 5th Street, 9th Street, 2 lived on 11th, 1 lived on 13th, and I lived on 15th Street.
Wow.
So I think I have a right to talk about the city.
Sure.
I used to live in this same city, and I live in the same house that I grew up in that my parents purchased in 1953, 54. I moved out of the city in 1975 and moved permanently back in 2006 and live in that same home near Benson and Chino Avenue. In reviewing this information, I think that it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea to have diversity in this city. I've seen that no offense to anyone here, I see that it hasn't happened for quite a while. And I believe that Plan 4.1, 4.2, and 6.1 are all good plans. I mean, they can be modified in different areas, but I think that it's good that there's going to be districts. And one of the reasons why is I think it's good that you have a council member that is committed to that district, so that way people from that community or that neighborhood can go there, and if there's a complaint, if there's something that they don't want to talk to someone in general, maybe to the police or to the fire department, they can talk to their council member and resolve an issue that may be a problem. So I've seen that many, many times because, for example, there's a lot of different issues that happen in the city that maybe the council isn't aware of, but I think that people would speak up if they did have a community-type council member. The other thing is that I think that when you look at all of these plans, you're being strong-armed. I agree with you. I have no doubt about that you're put into a situation that's a no-win situation for the city. And no one wants anyone to spend $3 million or anything for defense that is brought upon them by other attorneys. I mean, in the businesses that I've worked in, I've seen that happen too, where people stall things or do things, and they're created by attorneys in order for them to obtain money from cities or whomever. So I would encourage you that even though it's a hard pill to swallow, I believe that it's a positive thing. And I think if we take it as a positive thing, whether it's 4 districts or 6 districts, I think it's healthy for this city. And I think that I'm in agreement with it, since you guys don't have much of a choice, you know?
What are you going to do? Thank you.
So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Appreciate your testimony. That's all the written requests I have this evening. Is there anybody in the audience wishing to address the council? Come on up, Paul, and identify yourself for the record. And you have 5 minutes.
Good evening. I am Paul Rodriguez,
Dr. Rodriguez.
Dr. Paul Rodriguez.
Right.
Thanks for reminding me. I've looked over the plans very carefully this weekend and discussed it with my neighbors and family members, and I think Mr. Johnson did a very, very good job on a preliminary brainstorming, as he mentioned. There's an element that I think that this plan does not show, and that's the idea of cultural, historical experiences that are not always put into plans and surveys in this sense. One plan that I would accept that looks very good with modifications would be 4.1. In the sense of this, that I believe that when you actually look at the boundaries for Chino, when we go to the west, the boundary for Chino ends a little bit between Reservoir and East End. And then to the south, I believe that Section 1 should go all the way to Schaefer. And it's an odd map because not all of Chino hits 71 if you were to go down Riverside Drive. Okay, but it's more or less close. Reasoning why I would say Riverside or Schaefer Avenue is because it would be inclusive of Villa Park. And traditionally, when you look at that area, it's over 100 years old of multiple generations of families. And traditionally, when families die off, for lack of another word, or they move on, they usually pass on their homes or their property to the next generation. So the cultural experiences and historical experiences continue as they will. And if you look below, going south from Schaefer all the way down, myself having grown up on 9th Street across the street, I still consider that Dairyland. So people living in Villa Park and so forth above Schaefer are going to say, well, they have no connection with the preserve, and it would be polarizing them even more so. So that's another consideration right there. And also below Schaefer, it's mostly industrial. You're looking at the spectrum. You're looking at industry. And I agree with Mr. Johnson, yes, schools are important, and traditionally schools are linked to communities, and Villa Park and north of that are traditionally, having myself being an educator, they are connected to specific elementary schools and high schools, and also churches. Because if you think about Hispanics, they surrounded really, or lived or grew up around Our Lady of Guadalupe. So that was their church, their barrio, for lack of other words, because that's where they were told basically, this is where you're going to live. Instead of calling it a ghetto, it's called a barrio over here, right? But I think that's a reasonable plan that's not going to really be disruptive of many areas. The plan looks good on the other ones, but I think the best one would be 4-1. And I think the other point I want to say is this. I wanted to thank not only the council for all the great work and the great water we have to drink, but also when you look at the city government, let's think of ourselves as looking at the government as a chain of pearls, whereas each pearl on that chain is actually part of the whole. And what I mean by that, all the city workers, all the secretaries, all the directors, the human resource, our legal, they all have a system of government that they follow. They have traditions and even norms for conduct in conducting meetings, and traditions that are followed. So the city itself has mission, vision, and values that are still in place and are not going to be drastically changed if we have changes. And yes, I agree with Mr. Mayor Yates, Dennis, that yes, people have a hard time changing, but that's part of life. Every time we blink our eye, it's a different change. But people don't really take the time to really think about it. And another 4 areas that we really have going for the city, so is the idea of this, critical thinking, which we're doing now. And that involves the idea of thinking in time, the strengths, weaknesses, and OPIs and threats. And someone's going to say, well, what's an OPI? No, it's not Andy Griffith on TV. An OPI would be the opportunity for positive improvement. You're always moving towards that because it's greater to be in a positive way than to be in a negative. And even research will tell you that. The other 3 elements or attributes that the city has as a whole is the idea of communication. The communication is not one way, but 2-way, where you're going to have active listening. And I think that's in place too, that tradition. And then the idea of collaboration. There's a lot of collaboration. People work together. We are cohesive. And we are able to listen to each other and then move on. And we can agree to disagree. And then the last one would be the idea of creativity, the idea to move forward and to always not look at time, the element of time as an ending, but really as a way to say, okay, this is a goal so that we can keep moving forward. Okay, we landed on the moon. Now we're going to plan on moving to Mars, and we're going to keep moving forward. We're not stagnant as a group. So the fear of change should be minimal. And I'm going to end with this passage, and maybe people will be able to think a little bit more about change. Now the body is not a single part, but many. If a foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it does not for this reason belong any less to the body. Or if an ear should say, because I am not an eye, I should not belong to the body, it does not for this reason belong to any less to the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? If there were all one part, where would the body be? But as it is, there are many parts, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I do not need you, nor again the head to the feet, I do not need you. Indeed, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are the more necessary. And those parts of the body that we consider less honorable, we surround with greater honor, and our less presentable parts are treated with greater property and respect, so that there may be no divisions in the body, but that the parts may have the same concern for one another. If one part suffers, all the parts suffer with it. If one part is honored, all the parts share joy. I doubt seriously that in our districts that we will have Charlie checkpoints, or that we will start all of a sudden building bridges. No, bridges, yes, but not walls.
Yeah.
Or to have passes to move from one to another. I think if there are new councilmen, there's such a thing as mentoring, professional development, and the traditions and the values that are already in place, in the norms. So change is positive if we focus.
I don't think the norms and the mores of our community will change, and change is good, but to be
Yeah.
forced to do something that doesn't make sense by some law firm, they got a little niche where they can get after everybody and to make money. It's aggravating and it's upsetting, and that's the part of the changes that we don't like.
Yeah,
They don't know
think-
anything about this community, how it operates.
that's true.
You know, and they don't know about any of these cities that are
I
civil.
think
which is
after
aggravating.
1865, with the 14th Amendment, we had a lot of people with that were very upset, and perhaps even more upset even now.
Yeah,
So the change is not always going to be
I know,
agreeable with everyone,
but
but we need to move
somebody
forward.
forcing it under the guise of profit is aggravating.
I know, I understand.
Okay, Paul, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Appreciate your testimony. Anybody else wishing to address the council on this item? With that, I will close the public hearing. Any council comments? None at all? Okay. What we will do, we'll take the suggestions made by the public, and we will vote on this item on May 4th.
No, there's still some more minutes.
Huh? We will pick which one of these we want to take, right?
Well, if I may, Mr. Mayor, we got some good comments, and I'll take in the comments that Mr. George and Mr. Rodriguez made, or Dr. Rodriguez, sorry, made about the different maps. So there may be a couple more maps that we'll try to accommodate those, and as was mentioned, everything ripples. So they may come back looking ugly, but they will come back to show you how we can best do it. And if the council has any similar thoughts about maps that it would like to see, this would be a great time. And I should add for the public too, if you have other thoughts after this meeting, don't wait for the next meeting to show up and kind of surprise everybody, because the council is expecting to choose a map. It's much better to weigh in tomorrow, the next day, whatever, share your thoughts with the city clerk's office, they'll pass them on to me, and we can get them into the agenda packet so that the council can consider them and the public can consider them before we ask for a vote. But yes, if you have any direction on narrowing the maps or any other maps you'd like to see, that's certainly welcome today.
Thank
But
you,
next
Mr. Johnson.
meeting is a big decision.
Okay, with that, we will stand adjourned. The next regular meeting of the City Council will be held on Tuesday, May 3rd at 7 p.m. Closed session at 6 if necessary in these council chambers. And so we will stand adjourned till that time, and please drive safely and have a good evening.